Montana Territory, winter of 1885. A season of piercing cold and unrelenting snow, where survival depends on preparation, resilience, and sometimes desperate choices. A place where a woman's secret fortune becomes both her greatest protection and her gravest danger when she discovers the man she traveled over 1,000 miles to marry has left her stranded in a cabin surrounded by wilderness and enemies. Winter howls across the Bitterroot Valley, a brutal force that respects neither wealth nor intention. Through this merciless landscape travels Eleanor Caldwell, clutching correspondence from a man she's never met, but whose words promised warmth, protection, and a fresh beginning far from the whispers that followed her inheritance back east. But the isolated homestead that awaits her holds no welcoming embrace, only frost-covered windows, a cold hearth, and a mysterious bloodstain on the porch that tells her something has gone terribly wrong. This is the story of a resourceful woman who must navigate treachery and deception when the truth about her prospective husband unravels, revealing a web of danger that extends far beyond the snow-laden mountains. When a wounded lawman appears on her doorstep, fleeing ruthless pursuers, Eleanor must decide whether to trust this stranger with her secrets, including the small fortune in gold coins sewn into the lining of her trunks. Before the spring thaw arrives, she will be forced to become something she never imagined: protector, strategist, and perhaps even outlaw. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another deep drift, sending Eleanor Caldwell sliding across the leather seat. She braced herself against the opposite wall, wincing, as the wooden frame dug into her shoulder through layers of woolen cloak and traveling dress. 26 hours they'd been on this final leg of her journey, and it seemed Montana's infamous winter was determined to make these last miles the most punishing. "Larksburg Creek can't be much farther," muttered the only other passenger, a grizzled silver miner heading to his claim further west. He'd been mostly silent during their journey, but the worsening conditions had made him talkative. "Though I wouldn't count on meeting your intended today. Roads beyond the trading post will be near impassable." Eleanor merely nodded, unwilling to explain that her intended, James Morrison, had promised to meet her regardless of weather. His letters had emphasized his reliability, his determination. "I've built a sturdy homestead 7 miles beyond Larkspur Creek," he'd written. "It may be modest compared to your Boston comforts, but it's well constructed, with a fine view of the mountains when the weather permits. I'll meet each stage during the week of your expected arrival, weather be damned." She adjusted the heavy reticule in her lap, feeling the reassuring weight of the small Derringer pistol inside. The rest of her security, nearly $20,000, and dollars in gold double eagles, was cleverly distributed throughout her luggage. Some sewn into hidden pockets in her trunks, others concealed in false bottoms of toiletry cases, and a small emergency supply in a specially designed money belt beneath her petticoats. The inheritance that had transformed Eleanor from a respectable but ordinary schoolteacher into a woman of substantial means had also made her a target back in Boston. After her elderly uncle's death revealed his surprising fortune, the suitors had arrived with unseemly haste, their intentions transparent. When one particularly persistent gentleman had attempted to enter her rented rooms late one night, Eleanor had made her decision. The West, with its promise of fresh beginnings and fewer questions, beckoned. James Morrison's advertisement in the Matrimonial News had stood out for its plain-spoken honesty. Montana homesteader 34, established with good prospects, seeks educated. Eastern woman of practical disposition as wife and partner in building a future. Solitude and hard work guaranteed equally with respect and fair treatment. His subsequent letters had revealed an intelligent, straightforward man who valued education and independence, qualities Eleanor possessed in abundance. He'd made no attempt to disguise the challenges of frontier life, which she found refreshingly honest. When she'd guardedly mentioned coming into a modest inheritance that would allow her to travel comfortably, he'd responded that while additional capital would certainly benefit their homestead, he was offering partnership, not seeking financial. Rescue.Eleanor had decided to withhold the true extent of her fortune until she could judge James Morrison's character in person. Caution had become her steadfast companion. The stagecoach slowed, then stopped completely. Eleanor peered through the frost-etched window as the driver's voice carried through the howling wind. Larksburg Creek Trading Post. End of the line today. Can't risk the horses on those mountain passes in this storm. The door swung open, admitting a blast of frigid air and swirling snow. Eleanor gathered her cloak tightly and accepted the driver's outstretched hand, stepping carefully onto a wooden platform, nearly invisible beneath the drifting snow. Before her stood a sturdy log structure with smoke curling from its stone chimney, the trading post that served as Larksburg Creek's commercial center and stagecoach stop. "Best get inside, ma'am," the driver urged, already turning to help unload her trunks. "This storm's worsening by the minute." The trading post's interior was a welcome respite from the biting cold. A large, open room with a blazing hearth at its center, shelves lining the walls stocked with essential supplies, and a small counter where a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard was tallying figures in a ledger. "Thomas Blackwood," he introduced himself, looking up as she entered. "Welcome to what passes for civilization in these parts. You must be the Eastern bride Morrison's been expecting." "Eleanor Caldwell," she confirmed, removing her snow-crusted gloves. "I was to meet Mr. Morrison here. Has there been any word from him?" Something flickered across Blackwood's face, hesitation, perhaps concern, before he schooled his features. "No sign of Morrison in nearly 2 weeks, Miss Caldwell. Last time he came for supplies, he mentioned expecting you, bought extra provisions to see you both through the winter." 2 weeks? Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Has something happened?" Blackwood closed his ledger, slowly. "Hard to say. Winter in these mountains, well, it's unforgiving. A man can get caught in a sudden storm, lose his way, or his horse could throw a shoe at the wrong moment. Morrison's an experienced frontiersman, but..." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Surely someone could check on him, Eleanor pressed, fighting to keep the rising concern from her voice. "No one's heading up that mountain trail until this storm breaks," Blackwood said firmly. "Martha," he called toward a back room, "come meet Miss Caldwell. She'll need lodging for a few days." A handsome woman with auburn hair streaked with white emerged, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. Her shrewd eyes took in Eleanor's quality. Traveling clothes and the obvious distress on her face. "Martha Blackwood," she introduced herself. "Thomas's wife and the closest thing to a doctor in 50 miles. You're Morrison's mail-order bride?" Eleanor nodded, finding herself guided to a chair near the fire while the driver brought in her smaller traveling cases. "Your larger trunks will have to stay in our storeroom until there's transportation to Morrison's homestead," Thomas explained. "Martha will show you to our guest room. It's simple but clean and warm. I appreciate your hospitality, but I must get to Mr. Morrison's property as soon as possible," Eleanor insisted. "Perhaps someone could be hired to guide me." The Blackwoods exchanged glances. "Miss Caldwell," Martha said gently, "even if someone were willing, which they won't be in this weather, Morrison's place is 7 miles up mountain trails, now buried under 3 feet of snow. It would be suicide to attempt it without proper equipment and experience." "There's a man in the storeroom, might disagree with you," called a young voice. A boy of about 12 had appeared from the back of the store, his eyes bright with excitement. "Says he's heading up the North Trail as soon as his horse is rested." "Jacob," Martha scolded, "you know better than to eavesdrop on private conversations." "Who is this man?" Eleanor asked quickly. "Drifter," Thomas replied dismissively. "Came in an hour before you, half frozen. Says he's meeting someone up near Morrison's place." "I'd like to speak with him," Eleanor decided. If this stranger was heading in the right direction, perhaps they could travel together. It wasn't ideal, but she hadn't come all this way to be stranded at a trading post, while James Morrison might be in trouble. Thomas looked like he might refuse, but Martha nodded slowly. "I'll take you to him, but don't expect much. He's not a sociable type." The storeroom was warmer than Eleanor expected, heated by a small iron stove in the corner. Sitting beside it, a steaming cup of coffee in his gloved hands, was a man whose bearing immediately commanded attention, despite his sorry state. His dark hair was matted with snow and what looked disturbingly like dried blood at his temple. His face, though handsome in its strong lines, was haggard with exhaustion, a several days' growth of beard adding to his rough appearance. Most notably, his left arm was bound in a makeshift sling fashioned from what appeared to be a torn shirt. When he looked up at their entrance, Eleanor was struck by eyes the color of steel, alert, intelligent, and unmistakably wary. "Nathan Hawkins," Martha introduced him, though Eleanor noticed the man's jaw tighten slightly at the name. "This is Miss Caldwell. She's trying to reach James Morrison's homestead." Those penetrating grey eyes assessed Eleanor thoroughly before he spoke, his voice a low rasp. "Morrison's place? That's past where I'm headed. Trail's dangerous this time of year, for someone not used to mountain winters." "Nevertheless, I must get there," Eleanor replied firmly. "I understand you're traveling in that direction once your horse rests." A shadow crossed his face. "My business is urgent and not conducive to company." "I'm an excellent rider, Mr. Hawkins, and I assure you I won't slow you down," Eleanor countered, noting how he cradled his injured arm. "In fact, given your condition, you might find an extra pair of capable hands beneficial." His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Bold words from a city woman facing her first Montana blizzard. Bold circumstances call for bold decisions. "Mr. Hawkins," she met his gaze steadily, "I have reason to believe Mr. Morrison may be in trouble. I cannot in good conscience wait here while a storm convenient to everyone else's schedule decides to break." Something changed in his expression then, a flicker of reluctant respect, perhaps. He studied her for a long moment before responding. "We leave at first light," he said finally. "If the storm lets up even slightly, bring only what you can carry on a single horse. And understand this, Miss Caldwell. If your presence endangers my mission or slows me down critically, I'll continue. Alone." "What exactly is your mission, Mr. Hawkins?" Eleanor asked directly. The steel returned to his eyes. "Better you don't know. For your own safety." That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed in the Blackwoods' spare room, she found herself reconsidering the wisdom of traveling with the mysterious Nathan Hawkins. There was something he wasn't revealing, something beyond his obvious injury and the tension that seemed to radiate from him. Yet what choice did she have? James Morrison had not appeared as promised. His silence might indicate disaster. The gold sewn into her possessions represented her entire future, and she couldn't abandon it at the trading post indefinitely. And something about Hawkins, despite his rough exterior and secretive manner, suggested he was a man who kept his word. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the trading post's sturdy windows. Eleanor checked her derringer, ensuring it was loaded before placing it beneath her pillow. Tomorrow she would venture into the Montana wilderness with a wounded stranger whose real name she suspected wasn't Nathan Hawkins at all. She had come west seeking security and a fresh start. Instead, she found herself stepping willingly into uncertainty and potential danger. As sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor wondered what secrets awaited her at James Morrison's remote homestead, and what secrets her traveling companion was hiding behind those watchful grey eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot. of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn came reluctantly to Larksburg Creek, the pale winter light struggling to penetrate dense cloud cover. The storm had abated somewhat during the night, leaving behind a crystalline stillness and temperatures low enough to freeze breath into ice crystals. Eleanor dressed with practical efficiency, layering woolen undergarments beneath her sturdiest traveling dress, then adding thick leggings she'd purchased in preparation for Montana's harsh climate. Her fingers traced the cleverly concealed money, belt beneath her clothing, containing a small portion of her fortune, enough to establish herself should the worst have happened to James Morrison, but not so much as to be catastrophic if lost. The majority remained distributed throughout her luggage, most of which she'd be forced to leave behind at the trading post. "You're really going through with this madness," Martha Blackwood stated from the doorway. It wasn't a question. She carried a bundle of additional cold-weather gear, a fur-lined hat, heavy mittens, and what appeared to be hand-knitted wool socks. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Blackwood, but my decision is made." Eleanor accepted the offerings gratefully. Martha's weathered face softened slightly. "Thomas spoke with your Mr. Hawkins at first light. That man's in no condition to be heading into the mountains. Fevered from that wound, though he tries to. Hide it. And there's something else." She hesitated. "Thomas says he caught a glimpse of a badge when Hawkins opened his coat to pay for supplies. Thinks he might be a lawman of some kind." Eleanor absorbed this information carefully. A wounded lawman traveling under an assumed name could only be running towards something urgent or away from something dangerous. "Did your husband confront him about it?" "Lord, no. We mind our business out here, but you should know what you're riding into." "I appreciate the warning." Eleanor adjusted her collar, decision unchanged. "Has he said anything about his injury?" "Not a word, though it's clearly a bullet wound poorly tended." Martha's expression was grim. "I offered to examine it properly. He refused." A commotion from the trading post's main room interrupted them, raised voices, one of which Eleanor recognized as Hawkins. She hurried to investigate, Martha close behind. Thomas Blackwood stood near the counter, arms crossed defensively, while Hawkins loomed before him, tension evident in every line of his body, despite the injured arm. "Need to know if anyone's been asking after strangers," Hawkins was saying, his voice low but intense. "Particularly a group of men, well-armed, led by a tall man with a scar from here to here." He traced a line from his left eye to the corner of his mouth. "Like I told you, we've had no travelers besides yourself and Miss Caldwell in over a week," Thomas insisted. "The passes have been nearly impassable since the last major storm." Hawkins' expression remained skeptical, but he nodded curtly before turning toward Eleanor. Despite the fever Martha had mentioned, his grey eyes were clear and alert. "If you're still determined to make this journey, we should leave immediately. Daylight's precious this time of year." "I'm ready," Eleanor confirmed, retrieving her small travel bag, packed with only essential clothing, basic provisions, and her most valuable hidden gold coins, carefully distributed throughout the contents. Thomas Blackwood looked deeply troubled. "I've prepared supplies for you both, though I still believe this is foolhardy. The Morrison homestead is isolated at the best of times. In winter, with the main trails drifted over—" "I've marked alternate routes on a map," Hawkins interrupted, the impatience in his voice poorly concealed. "If the main path is blocked, we'll find another way." "And your injury?" Martha challenged directly. "That arm needs proper tending before you tackle mountain trails." "It will hold," he replied tersely. "We're wasting daylight." Minutes later, they stood outside the trading post where 2 horses waited. Hawkins's own mount, a powerful black gelding that stomped restlessly in the fresh snow, and a sturdy dun mare borrowed from the Blackwoods. Both animals were fitted with cold-weather tack and laden with carefully packed provisions. "The mare knows these trails better than most men," Thomas told Eleanor as he helped secure her bag. "She'll navigate safely if you give her head when needed." Martha pressed a small bundle into Eleanor's hands. "Medicinal herbs and clean bandages," she murmured. "For when that stubborn man's wound inevitably worsens. The red packets are willow bark for fever. The green contain yarrow for infection." Eleanor tucked the bundle securely into her saddlebag, nodding her thanks. Mounting required more effort than expected, the multiple layers of clothing restricting her movement. Once settled, she adjusted her posture, grateful for the riding lessons that had been part of a proper Boston education. Beside her, Hawkins swung into his saddle with surprising grace for an injured man, though she noted the momentary tightening around his eyes, the only indication of pain he allowed himself. "Follow directly behind me," he instructed. "The horses will break trail through the drifts. If we get separated for any reason, continue northeast toward that ridge." He pointed toward a distant formation barely visible through the trees. "Morrison's place lies in the valley beyond." With a final nod to the concerned Blackwoods, they set off. The horses moved at a deliberate pace, hooves crunching through the crusted snow surface into the powdery depths beneath. Wind had sculpted the drifts into fantastic shapes, some tall enough to reach Eleanor's stirrup despite her horse's considerable height. They rode in silence for the first hour, conserving energy as they navigated the difficult terrain. Eleanor used the time to study her companion surreptitiously. Despite his efforts to hide his condition, she noted the unnatural stiffness in his posture, the occasional tremor that ran through his frame when they navigated particularly challenging sections. The wound Martha identified as a bullet injury was clearly taking its toll. "How much further to where you're meeting someone?" she finally asked, as they paused to rest the horses near a frozen creek. Hawkins glanced at her sharply. "You don't miss much, do you, Miss Caldwell?" "I find observation serves me well in unfamiliar situations." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. 3 miles to where I need to detour from the main trail. Another 4 beyond that to Morrison's homestead, assuming the landmarks match my information." "And will you share the real purpose of your journey, or your actual name, perhaps?" Eleanor pressed, dismounting to stretch her cold, stiffened legs. "If we're to rely on each other through these mountains, a measure of honesty seems warranted." Hawkins remained mounted, scanning the surrounding forest with the hypervigilance Eleanor had noticed from their first meeting. After a long moment, he spoke without looking at her. "My name is Marshal Daniel Reeves. I'm tracking 4 men wanted for train robbery and murder in Wyoming territory." His voice was flat, emotionless. "One of them put this bullet in my shoulder 3 days ago when I got too close. I lost them in the last storm, but received intelligence they're holed up in an abandoned mining cabin near these parts. You intend to apprehend 4 murderers alone with a bullet wound that's likely festering." Eleanor couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I intend to observe their location and movements," he corrected. "When the storm clears enough for travel to Helena, federal reinforcements will join me for the actual arrest." Eleanor absorbed this information while adjusting her mare's girth. "These men, they're dangerous. They killed 2 guards and a passenger during the robbery, shot a young deputy who tried to stop them in a small town near the territorial border." His jaw tightened. "So yes, Miss Caldwell, extremely dangerous. And if they're closer to Morrison's homestead than you anticipate." Something flickered across the Marshal's face, a concern he'd clearly been harboring himself. "That's partly why I agreed to escort you. If there's any indication these men have been near Morrison's property, you'll need protection." The implication hung in the crisp air between them. If James Morrison had encountered these ruthless fugitives— "We should continue," Reeves said, abruptly changing the subject. "There's another storm building. I can smell it on the wind." They remounted and resumed their journey, the trail gradually climbing as they moved deeper into the mountains. The evergreens grew more densely here, their branches heavy with snow, occasionally releasing their burdens with soft sighs and muffled thuds. The world had narrowed to white and green, and the sound of their horses' labored breathing. By midday, the sky had darkened ominously. Fat snowflakes began drifting down, at first lazily, then with increasing urgency. "We need shelter," Reeves called back, raising his voice against the rising wind. "There's a trapper's lean-to about half a mile ahead if my map is accurate." The half-mile stretched endlessly as visibility deteriorated. Eleanor's face stung with cold, despite the scarf wrapped around her lower features. Beside her, Reeves rode with hunched shoulders, his injured arm clearly causing significant pain with each jolt of the horse's movement. When the crude shelter finally appeared, little more than a slanted roof with 3 partial walls built against a rocky outcropping, Eleanor could have wept with relief. They dismounted hastily, leading the horses into the relative protection of the structure. "It's not much," Reeves acknowledged, "but it blocks the worst of the wind. We can wait out the squall here." Eleanor busied herself arranging their supplies, while Reeves tended the horses, removing their bits so they could eat the grain he'd brought in small cloth bags. The storm intensified outside, howling through the trees with renewed fury. Their borrowed shelter rattled ominously with each gust. "You should let me examine your wound," Eleanor said, once the immediate tasks were complete. Mrs. Blackwood provided medical supplies. "It's fine," Reeves replied automatically, though the pallor of his face and the sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cold, told a different story. "You're fevered and growing weaker," she countered firmly. "If you collapse before we reach Morrison's homestead, neither of us will survive this wilderness. Now remove your coat and show me the injury." Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, perhaps recognizing the logic of her argument, he complied with obvious reluctance. Removing his outer layers required her assistance, each movement clearly sending fresh waves of pain through his injured shoulder. When the wound was finally revealed, Eleanor fought to keep her expression neutral. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving an angry, inflamed entry and exit wound. His makeshift bandaging had been woefully inadequate, allowing infection to set in. "This needs to be properly cleaned and dressed," she stated, reaching for Martha's medicinal bundle. "It will hurt considerably." Reeves gave a short, humorless laugh. "I'm acquainted with pain, Miss Caldwell." As Eleanor set to work with methodical precision, she found herself wondering what series of events had led them both to this precarious situation. A Boston schoolteacher with a fortune in gold hidden on her person, tending the gunshot wound of a federal marshal in a dilapidated shelter, while killers possibly lurked in the surrounding wilderness. And somewhere ahead lay James Morrison's homestead, where further mysteries awaited. Had he simply been delayed by the weather, or had something more sinister befallen the man whose carefully penned letters had drawn her across the continent? Outside, the storm continued unabated, trapping them in their primitive shelter as daylight slowly faded into the long mountain twilight. The storm raged through the afternoon and into evening, transforming their meager shelter into an island. In a sea of whiteout conditions, Eleanor had finished tending Reeves's wound to the best of her ability, cleaning the inflamed flesh with melted snow water and applying Martha Blackwood's herbal poultices before wrapping it in clean bandages. Throughout her ministrations, the Marshal had remained stoically silent, though beads of sweat betrayed his pain. "You've done this before," he observed as she secured the final bandage. "My father was a physician in Boston," Eleanor explained, repacking the remaining medical supplies. "He believed women should understand practical medicine, regardless of social expectations." She didn't add that these skills had proven essential during the war between the states, when she'd assisted in a military hospital despite her youth. Some memories remained too painful to share with a stranger. "Your father sounds like an unusual man," He was. The past tense hung briefly between them. He died of pneumonia 3 years ago. My mother had passed years earlier. Reeves nodded, understanding the unspoken remainder of her story. A single woman alone in the world, vulnerable despite her education. It explained much about her journey west. "And Morrison?" he asked, adjusting his position against the rough-hewn wall of their shelter. "How much do you know about the man you traveled so far to marry?" Eleanor considered the question while retrieving a small pot and supplies for a simple meal. His letters were straightforward, intelligent. He described his homestead in detail: a main cabin with 2 rooms, a small stable for livestock, a workshop where he crafts furniture during winter months. He mentioned neighbors, though distant ones, names of these neighbors: the Hendersons to the north, an elderly couple named Abernathy to the east. Why? Reeves's expression remained carefully neutral. Just trying to establish landmarks. If Morrison has been delayed, these neighbors might have information. The implication that James might have met with foul play remained unspoken, but hung heavy in the air between them. Eleanor busied herself melting snow in the small pot, adding dried meat and beans from their provisions to create a basic stew. "Your turn for honesty, Marshal," she said finally. "These men you're tracking, tell me about them." Reeves hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "They call themselves the Blackwell Gang, after their leader Samuel Blackwell, former Confederate officers who turned to robbery rather than rebuilding after the war. They started with small banks in Texas, graduated to trains when banks improved, in their security, and now they're hiding in these mountains. Railroad detective received information they were headed this way after the last robbery, supposedly have a contact who provides shelter and supplies in exchange for a cut of their takings." Eleanor stirred the simmering pot, digesting this information. "You think this contact might be connected to Morrison's disappearance?" "It's possible," Reeves admitted. "The timing is suspicious. If Morrison encountered these men, or unwittingly interfered with their arrangement with this local contact." He left the sentence unfinished. The implications chilled Eleanor more effectively than the howling wind. She'd journeyed west seeking security and partnership, only to find herself potentially stepping into a deadly situation involving dangerous fugitives. "You should eat," she said, changing the subject as she portioned their simple meal into tin cups. "Regain your strength." They ate in relative silence, conserving warmth and energy as darkness settled fully over the mountains. Outside, the storm continued unabated, snow accumulating against the open side of their shelter despite Reeves's periodic efforts to clear it away. "We'll need to maintain watch through the night," the Marshal said, checking his revolver with his good hand. "4 hours each. I'll take first shift." Eleanor assessed his condition critically. "You need rest more than I do. Your body is fighting infection." "I've endured worse," he countered stubbornly. "That doesn't make it wise to court exhaustion when we have miles to travel tomorrow." Her tone brooked no argument. "I'm perfectly capable of remaining alert and waking you if necessary." Their eyes locked in another silent battle of wills. Finally, Reeves nodded curtly, passing her the revolver. "Safety's off. It's primed and ready. 6 shots. Make them count if needed." The heavy weight of the weapon in her hands reminded Eleanor of how precarious their situation truly was. She positioned herself near the opening of the shelter, wrapped in her warmest layers, the revolver ready on her lap. "I doubt anyone would be traveling in this weather," she remarked, attempting to lighten the moment. "It's not just human threats to consider," Reeves replied, settling himself awkwardly against his saddle. "Mountain lions occasionally seek shelter during storms. They typically avoid humans, but hunger can override caution." With that comforting thought, he closed his eyes, though Eleanor suspected he remained partially alert. Even as his breathing gradually deepened, the hours of her watch passed slowly. The storm's intensity waxed and waned, occasionally abating enough to reveal glimpses of the night sky before closing in again with renewed fury. The horses shifted restlessly in their limited space, and Eleanor periodically checked their blankets, ensuring the animals remained as warm as possible under the circumstances. Her mind wandered inevitably to James Morrison and what might await her at his homestead. Had he simply been delayed by weather, injured perhaps but alive? Or had something more sinister occurred, an encounter with Reeves's fugitives, or some other danger these mountains harbored? And what of her own situation? The gold fortune concealed in her possessions represented freedom and security, yet also made her vulnerable should its existence become known. She had not revealed this information to Reeves, unsure whether prudence or unfair suspicion guided her reticence. The wind shifted suddenly, driving snow directly into the shelter and startling Eleanor from her thoughts. As she rose to adjust their makeshift barricade of branches and saddle blankets, a sound caught her attention. Distinct. From the storm's constant howling, she froze, straining to hear. There it came again, the distant but unmistakable whinny of a horse, answered by their own mount's soft nickering. "Reeves!" she whispered urgently, moving to wake the marshal. "Someone's nearby." He came awake instantly, years of lawman's training, evident in his immediate alertness. "Where?" "I heard a horse, not far to the west." He rose silently, grimacing slightly as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. Taking the revolver from her hands, he moved cautiously to the shelter's opening, peering into the swirling snow. For long minutes they waited in tense silence. The storm had momentarily lessened, allowing visibility for perhaps 20 yards before the landscape dissolved into white obscurity. "There!" Reeves breathed, indicating a shadowy movement among the trees. Eleanor squinted, barely making out what appeared to be a mounted figure moving slowly through the blizzard. As they watched, the rider seemed to waver in the saddle before slumping forward across the horse's neck. "He's injured," Eleanor whispered. Reeves hesitated, clearly torn between caution and humanitarian concern. "Could be a trap," he murmured. One man visible, others concealed nearby, but the horseman had now slipped further, hanging precariously from the saddle. Even as they watched, he toppled completely, falling heavily into a snowdrift, while his horse continued forward a few paces before stopping. "Trap or not, that man will freeze to death within minutes," Eleanor said decisively, already reaching for her outer garments. Reeves placed a restraining hand on her arm. "I'll go. Keep the revolver and stay hidden. If you hear gunfire—" He didn't complete the instruction, but his meaning was clear. If shots rang out, she was to flee immediately. She watched anxiously as the marshal made his way through knee-deep snow toward the fallen rider. His approach cautious, revolver held, ready despite the awkwardness of using his non-dominant hand. From her vantage point, she could see him checking the surrounding area before kneeling beside the prone figure. After a brief examination, Reeves holstered his weapon and began the laborious process of lifting the unconscious man. The effort clearly cost him, his injured shoulder undoubtedly protesting such treatment. When he finally staggered back toward their shelter, half carrying, half dragging the stranger through the deep snow, Eleanor rushed forward to assist, despite his earlier instructions. "Help me get him inside," Reeves gasped, his face pale with exertion and pain. Together they managed to bring the unconscious rider into their shelter. In the dim light of their small fire, Eleanor could see he was a young man, perhaps 25, with a weathered face that spoke of outdoor living. His clothes were frontier practical: heavy canvas trousers, woolen shirt, leather vest, and a sheepskin coat now sodden with melting snow. "He's alive, but barely," Reeves reported, checking the man's pulse. "No obvious injuries, but his breathing is labored. Hypothermia, most likely." "We need to remove these wet clothes and warm him gradually," Eleanor said, already working on the stranger's frozen boot laces. Did you recognize him? Could he be one of your fugitives? Reeves shook his head. Not Blackwell or any of his known associates. He continued searching the man methodically, checking pockets and the small saddlebag, still slung across his shoulder. No identification. Wait. From an inner pocket, he withdrew a folded piece of paper, opening it carefully to prevent tearing the dampened material. His expression changed as he scanned its contents. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, pausing in her efforts to remove the stranger's wet outer garments. "A letter," Reeves replied slowly, "addressed to James Morrison." Eleanor's hands stilled completely. "He knows James. Is he from Larksburg Creek?" "No." Reeves looked up, his grey eyes troubled. "According to this, he's Owen Sullivan, James Morrison's brother-in-law from Helena." "Brother-in-law," Eleanor repeated, confusion evident in her voice. "James never mentioned being married in his letters. This suggests otherwise." Reeves handed her the partially legible letter. "It references Sarah's death and appears to be responding to news Morrison sent about your impending arrival." Eleanor scanned the water-blurred writing, her heart pounding as certain phrases leaped from the page. "Understand your reluctance to mention Sarah's passing to your intended bride. Barely a year since we laid her to rest. Hope Miss Caldwell brings you the new beginning you deserve." "He was a widower," she whispered, looking at the unconscious man with new understanding. "And this is his late wife's brother traveling to the homestead, perhaps to meet me. In the middle of the worst blizzard in years." Reeves sounded skeptical. "There's more to this situation than a family visit." Before Eleanor could respond, Owen Sullivan stirred feebly, his eyelids fluttering. They both leaned closer as his lips moved, forming words barely audible above the storm's continuous assault. "James," he murmured, "danger. Men came looking for gold." His voice faded as he slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Eleanor and Reeves staring at each other in stunned silence. After a moment, the Marshal spoke, his voice grim. "Seems your intended husband might be involved with my fugitives after all, or at least someone believes he's connected to something valuable they want." His penetrating gaze studied Eleanor's face carefully. "Any idea what Morrison might have that would draw dangerous men to his remote homestead?" Eleanor maintained her composure with effort, mind racing. Could James somehow know about her inheritance? She'd been deliberately vague in her letters, mentioning only a modest sum that would allow her comfortable travel. Had he shared even this limited information with others who might have exaggerated its significance? "None whatsoever," she replied steadily. "Though I imagine an established homestead would have some valuables, tools, livestock, perhaps savings." Reeves didn't appear entirely convinced by her response, but the immediate need to tend to Sullivan took precedence over further questioning. Together, they worked to stabilize the hypothermic man, gradually warming him with blankets heated near their small fire. As they labored, Eleanor's thoughts tumbled in growing apprehension. Owen's fragmentary warning suggested James Morrison was in genuine danger, perhaps had been since before her journey began. The homestead she'd traveled so far to reach might now be occupied not by her prospective husband, but by ruthless men searching for treasure. And if they discovered the fortune literally sewn into her possessions, the blizzard raged on outside their fragile shelter, trapping them with their unconscious visitor and the troubling questions his arrival had raised. Whatever awaited them, at Morrison's homestead, Eleanor was increasingly certain it would bear little resemblance to the peaceful future she had envisioned during her long journey west. Dawn arrived with merciful calm, the storm having spent its fury during the night. The world outside their shelter lay transformed, familiar contours buried beneath fresh snow that sparkled blindingly in the early morning sunlight. The temperature had plummeted in the storm's wake, the air so crisp it seemed almost crystalline. Inside, their crude refuge, Eleanor stirred from the light doze she'd fallen into during the final hours of night. She had taken the second watch after Reeves's turn, but the Marshal had remained stubbornly awake alongside her, his attention divided between their unconscious visitor and the wilderness beyond their shelter. Owen Sullivan's condition had stabilized, somewhat after their initial efforts to warm him. His breathing had deepened and color returned to his face, though he remained unconscious, occasionally mumbling incoherent fragments that yielded no further information. "We need to move," Reeves announced, already checking his weapons and gathering their sparse belongings. Temperatures dropped. If it holds, the snow's crust will bear weight for a few hours before the sun softens it. Best chance to make progress. Eleanor nodded, rising stiffly to prepare a hasty breakfast from their provisions. "What about Mr. Sullivan? We take him with us." His horse wandered off in the night, probably heading back to wherever he started from, but leaving him here means certain death. "He's in no condition to ride independently," Eleanor observed, glancing at the still form wrapped in their shared blankets. "He'll ride double with me," Reeves decided after brief consideration. "My gelding's the stronger mount. Your mare will have enough challenge breaking trail through these drifts without an additional burden." The logistics of managing an unconscious man and two horses with only one completely functional rider proved daunting. After multiple awkward attempts, they settled on securing Sullivan to Reeves' back, using improvised straps cut from a spare saddle blanket. An arrangement that clearly caused the Marshal significant pain from his injured shoulder, though he stoically refused Eleanor's concerned inquiries. "Morrison's homestead can't be more than 4 miles now," he said as they set out, the horses picking their way carefully along the snow-buried trail. "We should reach it by midday if conditions hold." They traveled in tense silence, each lost in private thoughts about what might await them. The pristine landscape offered no hints of human passage. No tracks, no smoke from distant chimneys, nothing to suggest anyone else had traveled this route since the storm. Occasionally, Reeves would halt to check their bearings against landmarks, partially visible beneath their white shrouds. A distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck tree, a steep drop-off to their right that he identified as Blackwater Ravine. "Morrison's place should lie just beyond that rise," he finally announced, indicating a gentle slope ahead where evergreens stood as dark sentinels against the snow. "There's a natural meadow where he built his cabin, according to my information." Eleanor felt a curious mixture of apprehension and anticipation as they began the final approach. After all the miles traveled, all the hardships endured, she would soon see the homestead that was to have been her new beginning, and perhaps discover James Morrison's fate. The first sign that something was amiss came as they crested the rise. In the center of the snow-covered meadow stood a sturdy log cabin, larger than Eleanor had expected, with a small stable and workshop positioned nearby, exactly as James had described in his letters. But no smoke rose from the stone chimney, and no paths had been cleared through the deep snow surrounding the buildings, unusual circumstances for an active homestead, especially in such bitter weather. Reeves reined his horse to a stop, scanning the scene with the practiced eye of a lawman. "Stay here," he instructed, carefully transferring Sullivan's weight to Eleanor's steadying hands before dismounting. Drawing his revolver, he began making his way toward the silent cabin, moving in a zigzag pattern that utilized available cover. Eleanor watched anxiously, acutely aware of her vulnerability with an unconscious man partially draped across her saddle and only limited experience with the small derringer concealed in her pocket. Minutes stretched endlessly until Reeves finally emerged from the cabin, gesturing for her to approach. "It's secure," he called. "No one's here." Guiding her mare forward, Eleanor navigated through the pristine drifts until she reached the cabin's front porch. A wooden ramp had been built alongside the traditional steps, evidence of practical forethought that aligned with the James Morrison she had come to know through his correspondence. "Help me with Sullivan," Reeves said, already lifting the unconscious man from where he was secured to the saddle. Together they managed to carry him into the cabin and place him on a sturdy bed in the main room. Only then did Eleanor have opportunity to examine her surroundings, the home that was to have been hers, now silent and cold as a tomb. Despite its abandoned state, the cabin showed evidence of careful construction and thoughtful planning. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with ample wood stacked nearby. Open shelving held an array of provisions and cooking implements. A solid table with 4 handcrafted chairs stood in the center, while a small desk positioned beneath a window suggested a place for correspondence and record-keeping. Most striking were the bookshelves, 3 full units containing volumes ranging from practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry to classic literature and poetry. James had mentioned his love of reading in his letters, but the extent of his library surprised her. This was no rough frontier dwelling, but the home of an educated, forward-thinking man who valued both practicality and intellectual pursuits. The bedrooms through there, Reeves indicated a doorway covered by a heavy curtain. "You should check it while I examine the outbuildings." Eleanor pushed aside the curtain to discover a smaller room containing another bed, this one neatly made with a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a handsome wooden chest. On the wall hung a framed daguerreotype of a young woman with a serious expression, her dark hair arranged in an outdated style. Sarah Morrison, Eleanor presumed, the wife James had never mentioned. The room showed no signs of disturbance, no evidence of violence or hasty departure. It was as if the owner had simply stepped out, expecting to return shortly. On the bedside table lay a book, a dried maple leaf marking a page midway through. Returning to the main room, Eleanor found Reeves had started a fire in the hearth, its welcome warmth beginning to dispel the cabin's bone-deep chill. "I'll need to check the outbuildings," he said, already moving toward the door. "Stay inside. Keep your derringer ready." Alone with the unconscious Sullivan, Eleanor set about making the cabin more hospitable. She found clean water in a covered bucket, still liquid though ice-cold, and used it to brew willowbark tea using Martha Blackwood's medicinal herbs. Working methodically, she managed to raise Sullivan's head enough to administer small sips, encouraged when he swallowed reflexively. Her next discovery came while searching for additional blankets in a cedar chest near the hearth. Beneath several quilts lay a small wooden box, its brass hinges tarnished with age. Opening it revealed a collection of personal items: a woman's silver hairbrush, a tarnished locket containing a lock of dark hair, several letters bound with faded ribbon, and a small leather-bound journal. Eleanor hesitated, her hand hovering over these private mementos. To examine them felt intrusive, yet they might contain information crucial to understanding James Morrison's disappearance. After brief deliberation, she lifted the journal, telling herself that extenuating circumstances justified the invasion of privacy. The neat, precise handwriting matched the letters she had received, definitely James Morrison's hand. Entries were sporadic rather than daily, typically recording significant events or observations. She turned to the final pages, searching for clues about his recent activities. November 12, 1885, first significant snowfall. Northern Pass likely closed until spring. Received letter confirming EC departed Boston on schedule. Should arrive Larksburg Creek by month's end, weather permitting. Preparations for winter nearly complete. Sarah would have been pleased to see the feminine touches finally added to her home. November 18th, Henderson reports strangers asking questions at Granite Peak Settlement. 4 men, well armed, supposedly prospecting despite the approaching winter. Description matches Blackwell Gang from wanted posters. Concerning development, especially with EC's imminent arrival. may need to reconsider meeting schedule. November 21st. Strangers appeared at Homestead today, claiming to be lost. Leader introduced himself as Samuel Wright, but recognized him from description as Samuel Blackwell. Maintained appearance of ordinary hospitality while keeping rifle near. They asked unusually specific questions about local families, particularly those who might have valuable items worth safekeeping during harsh winter. Clear implication of planned robbery. Claimed they were camping at Old Frederick's mine. After departure, discovered boot prints indicating someone examined workshop and stable while others distracted me. Disturbing development. November 24th. Must warn Owen. Blackwell gang definitely targeting area homesteads. Too dangerous to leave EC unescorted from Larksburg Creek with such men nearby. Will ride to Henderson Place tomorrow. Use their messenger service to send word to Owen in Helena. Have hidden emergency funds in usual location in case quick departure becomes necessary. The final entry ended there. Eleanor checked the date. November 24th, nearly 3 weeks ago. James had disappeared. Shortly after writing this, apparently while attempting to arrange safe escort for her arrival. And he had recognized the Blackwell gang, the same men Marshal Reeves was pursuing. The sound of the cabin door opening startled Eleanor from her reading. She quickly returned the journal to its box and replaced it in the chest as Reeves entered, brushing snow from his coat. Stables are empty, he reported. 2 stalls, both recently mucked out before being abandoned. Workshops locked tight. No signs of violence or struggle anywhere on the property. He knew your fugitives were here, Eleanor said without preamble, deciding honesty about her discovery outweighed concerns about snooping. She quickly summarized the journal entries. James was planning to warn Sullivan and arrange escort for my arrival when he disappeared. Reeves absorbed this information with a grim expression. That matches what we know. Blackwell's gang has been targeting isolated homesteads, focusing on those likely to have valuables or cash reserves. But why target this specific area? These mountains must have dozens of remote homesteads. Before Reeves could respond, a weak voice interrupted from the bed. Gold, Owen Sullivan said, his eyes now open though glazed with lingering fever. They're looking for Peterson's lost shipment. Both turned to find Sullivan struggling to sit up. Eleanor quickly moved to assist him, adjusting pillows to support his still weakened frame. Easy, she cautioned. You've suffered severe exposure. Your body needs time to recover. No time, he rasped, accepting the cup of willowbark tea she offered. They have James. Took him nearly 2 weeks ago when he came to warn me. His gaze moved between them, settling on Eleanor with dawning recognition. You must be Miss Caldwell. James is intended. I am, she confirmed. And this is Marshal Daniel Reeves. He's tracking the men who may have taken Mr. Morrison. Blackwell! Sullivan spat the name like a curse. Convinced James knows where Peterson's gold is hidden. Been holding him at the old mining camp, trying to make him reveal the location. Peterson's gold? Reeves asked sharply. Sullivan nodded, wincing at the movement. Army payroll shipment ambushed 5 years ago in Blackwater Pass. 3 guards killed, 20,000 in gold coins stolen. The thieves were later found dead. In a ravine, apparently turned on each other, but the gold was never recovered. His breathing came in labored gasps as he continued. Local legend claims it's still hidden somewhere in these mountains. Blackwell's gang came looking for it, somehow. Learned James's father was one of the original search party. Believe he passed on information about likely hiding places. Eleanor and Reeves exchanged glances, both recognizing the dire implications. If Blackwell believed James Morrison knew the location of a lost fortune, they would stop at nothing to extract that information, including torture. That's why you were traveling through the blizzard, Reeves deduced. You learned they had taken Morrison and were coming to investigate, followed their trail to the Old Frederick's mine, was watching from the ridge when I saw them drag James back inside after some kind of interrogation. planned to return to Granite Peak for help, but the storm caught me. Sullivan's strength was clearly failing, his eyelids drooping despite his evident determination to continue. 4 men, heavily armed, James looked badly beaten but alive. His voice trailed off as consciousness slipped away once more. Eleanor adjusted his blankets while processing this alarming information. James Morrison, the man she had traveled so far to marry, was alive but being held prisoner by dangerous men, possibly subjected to torture for information he likely didn't possess. "If Sullivan found them, we can too," she said, turning to Reeves with newfound determination. "This Frederick's mine. Do you know its location?" The Marshal studied her with that penetrating grey gaze. "According to my map, it's approximately 3 miles northwest of here. Abandoned silver operation in the foothills." He paused, clearly weighing his next words carefully. "Miss Caldwell, I understand your concern for Morrison, but this changes my mission parameters significantly. I now have confirmation of the Blackwell gang's location and criminal activity. Protocol demands I return to the nearest settlement for reinforcements before attempting apprehension." "That would take days," Eleanor protested. "James might not have that long if they're interrogating him as Sullivan described. 4 against 1 are poor odds even for an experienced lawman," Reeves countered. "With my injured shoulder and no backup, a direct confrontation would likely end poorly for both Morrison and myself." Eleanor recognized the logic in his assessment, even as she rebelled against the thought of James suffering while they retreated to safety. As she considered their limited options, her hand unconsciously moved to the hidden money belt beneath her clothing, the tangible reminder of the fortune that represented her independence and security, a fortune in gold coins, just like the lost army payroll Blackwell sought. "I have a proposition, Marshal Reeves," Eleanor said, breaking the tense silence that had fallen after Sullivan lapsed back into unconsciousness. She moved toward the cabin's small window, watching as the winter sun cast long shadows across the pristine snow. "One that might allow us to help Mr. Morrison without waiting for reinforcements." Reeves remained by the hearth, his expression guarded. "I'm listening." "What if the Blackwell gang found their gold?" She turned to face him directly. "Or at least, what they believed to be Peterson's lost shipment." The Marshal's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Eleanor took a steadying breath. The decision to reveal her secret had not come easily, but James Morrison's life hung in the balance, and despite never having met the man, she felt a responsibility to the person whose thoughtful letters had drawn her across the continent. "I have gold, Marshal, a considerable amount." She held his gaze steadily. "My inheritance converted to double eagles for ease of transport, approximately $20,000 worth." Reeves stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You've been carrying that sum across the frontier, alone." "It's distributed throughout my possessions in various hiding places," she explained. "Some in false-bottomed toiletry cases, some sewn into the linings of my trunks, which remained at the trading post," he finished, understanding dawning. "Except what you brought with you," Eleanor nodded. "I keep a portion with me at all times. Nearly $4,000 concealed in this clothing I'm wearing and the small travel bag I insisted on bringing." She began pacing the small cabin, her mind working through the details of her forming plan. What if we use this gold to create a diversion? Make the Blackwell gang believe Peterson's shipment has been discovered somewhere else, drawing them away from Morrison. Reeves considered this for several long moments, absently rubbing his injured shoulder. "It's risky. These men are killers, not easily fooled." "But they're also greedy," Eleanor countered. "According to Sullivan, they've been holding Morrison for nearly 2 weeks, which suggests he hasn't revealed the gold's location, likely because he genuinely doesn't know it. Their frustration must be mounting. If presented with tangible evidence of the gold elsewhere, They might abandon a fruitless interrogation to pursue the sure thing. Reeves completed her thought, warming to the strategy despite his evident reservations. But how would we convince them without putting ourselves directly in their path? Eleanor moved to the window again, studying the landscape as the sun began its early winter descent. Sullivan mentioned he was watching them from a ridge near the mine. There must be locations where one could observe their camp without being detected. What if we stage a discovery within their sight? Something that appears accidental but would draw their attention? A spark of tactical appreciation appeared in the Marshal's grey eyes. Create a scenario where they believe they've stumbled upon someone else finding the lost shipment. Precisely. We make noise, act as if we've uncovered something valuable, display just enough gold to be convincing, all from a position where they can observe, but not immediately reach us. When they pursue the apparent discovery, they'd temporarily abandon their camp, Reeves continued, fully engaged with the strategy now. Giving you opportunity to free Morrison, Eleanor finished. The beauty of this approach is that we dictate the timing and location rather than confronting them directly in their stronghold. Reeves studied her with newfound respect, mingled with concern. It has potential, but the risks remain substantial. If they catch any hint of deception, or if they split their forces rather than all pursuing the diversion, then we abandon the attempt and retreat, Eleanor acknowledged. But at least we'll have tried something beyond leaving a man to suffer while we seek distant help that might arrive too late. The Marshal paced the cabin, weighing options with the methodical consideration of a man accustomed to life or death. Decisions. Finally, he nodded. I need to scout the mine first, verify Sullivan's information, and identify potential approach routes. If Morrison is indeed there, and the terrain allows for your diversion plan, we can proceed. Eleanor felt a rush of relief mixed with apprehension. When would you conduct this reconnaissance? Immediately, Reeves decided. We have perhaps 3 hours of daylight remaining. Enough time to reach the mine, observe the situation, and return. After dark. I'm coming with you, Eleanor stated, her tone making clear this wasn't a request. Absolutely not. The risk is one I choose to accept, she interrupted firmly. This plan relies on my gold and my participation. I won't sit here waiting while others implement my strategy. She gestured toward Sullivan's still form. Besides, Mr. Sullivan needs regular monitoring. You can hardly bring him along on a scouting mission, and leaving him completely alone in his condition would be unconscionable. Frustration flashed across Reeves's face before resignation set in. Your stubbornness rivals that of any deputy I've trained, Miss Caldwell. Very well, but you follow my instructions without question. Your Eastern ideas of independence mean nothing to a bullet. Agreed, she replied simply. They moved with efficient purpose after that, preparing for the scouting expedition with minimal discussion. Eleanor gathered what gold coins she could access without completely dismantling her carefully constructed hiding places, enough to create a convincing display for their potential diversion. Reeves located a small spyglass in Morrison's belongings, tested his revolver, and sketched a rough map of the area based on Sullivan's information and his own. Regional knowledge. We travel light and quiet, he instructed, as they prepared to depart. Leave the horses here, they're too easily spotted and heard. The mine isn't far as the crow flies, though the terrain is challenging. After ensuring Sullivan was stable, his fever reduced and breathing regular, they secured the cabin and set out into the late afternoon. The temperature had begun dropping again as shadows lengthened, refreezing the snow's surface to a crunchy crust that supported their weight in most places, but occasionally gave way to knee-deep drifts. Reeves set a careful pace, selecting their route to utilize natural cover whenever possible. Despite his injured shoulder, he moved with the practiced stealth of a man accustomed to tracking both wildlife and human quarry, occasionally signaling for Eleanor to freeze when distant sounds caught his attention. As they climbed a gradual incline dotted with evergreens and rocky outcroppings, he finally spoke in a near whisper. The Fredericks mine lies just beyond this ridge. The main entrance faces east, meaning the afternoon sun will have melted the snow near the opening. If Blackwell's gang is still there, they'll have sentries posted. How do we approach without being seen? Eleanor whispered back, acutely aware of how exposed they would be crossing the open snowfield, visible through the trees ahead. Reeves pointed toward a jumble of massive boulders to their right. Those formations continue around the northern edge of the clearing. We'll use them as cover to reach a vantage point above the mine entrance. The boulder-strewn slope proved treacherous to navigate. Loose rocks hidden beneath snow threatening to slip underfoot or create noisy miniature avalanches. Eleanor followed Reeves's path exactly, placing her feet precisely where he had stepped, grateful for the practical boots she'd purchased in preparation for Montana's challenging terrain. After 20 minutes of painstaking progress, they reached a narrow shelf halfway up the rocky hillside that offered both concealment and a clear view of the area below. Reeves gestured for Eleanor to remain flat as they crawled the final distance to the edge. The sight that greeted them confirmed Sullivan's account. In a small clearing below stood the weathered remnants of the Fredericks silver mine, a large, timber-framed entrance set into the hillside, several dilapidated outbuildings, and the rusted hulk of abandoned mining equipment half buried in snow. Signs of current occupation were evident, smoke rising from a repurposed shed chimney. 3 horses tethered in a crude lean-to, and a man with a rifle pacing near the mine entrance. "One visible guard," Reeves murmured, extending the spyglass for a closer examination. "Means at least 2 others plus Blackwell are likely inside. The main tunnel extends approximately 200 feet into the hillside according to old mining records. They're probably holding Morrison in one of the small chambers off the main shaft." Eleanor studied the layout, mentally calculating distances and approaches. How close could we get for our diversion without being immediately visible to that guard? Reeves considered the terrain carefully. That ravine to the southeast might work. It's perhaps 300 yards from the mine entrance, visible but not immediately accessible. If we create our scenario there, they'd have to circle around, rather than approaching directly. Gives us time to maneuver. What about your approach to free Morrison, once we've drawn them away? There's a ventilation shaft on the northern side. He indicated a barely visible opening further up the hillside. Standard mining design means it likely connects to the main tunnel near the back. Tight fit, but manageable. As they continued observing, the guard below was joined by another man, larger, with a distinctive limp and what appeared to be a significant scar, visible even from their distant vantage point. "Blackwell himself," Reeves whispered, tension evident in his voice. "I'd recognize that walk anywhere." The 2 men conversed briefly before Blackwell gestured impatiently toward the mine entrance. The guard nodded and disappeared inside, leaving Blackwell alone, scanning the surrounding area with obvious frustration. "He's growing impatient," Reeves observed. "That works in our favor. Men make mistakes when patience wears thin." After several minutes, the guard reappeared, accompanied by 2 more men dragging a third between them. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see this new figure was in poor condition. Head hanging, movements uncoordinated, clothes torn and darkened with what appeared to be dried blood. "Morrison!" She breathed, instinctively reaching for Reeves's arm. They watched in grim silence as James Morrison was thrown roughly to the ground at Blackwell's feet. The gang leader gestured angrily, his voice carrying faintly up to their position, though the words remained indistinguishable. Whatever response Morrison gave clearly displeased him, as Blackwell's next action was a vicious kick to the fallen man's ribs. Eleanor flinched, her fingers digging into Reeves's sleeve. The Marshal's expression hardened to granite as they continued. to witness Morrison's brutal treatment. After several more minutes of this one-sided interaction, Blackwell finally gestured for his men to return their prisoner to the mine. "We've seen enough," Reeves said once Morrison had been dragged back inside. "He's alive, but won't be for much longer if this continues." Blackwell's clearly reaching the end of his tolerance. They retreated carefully from their vantage point, working their way back through the boulder field until they reached the relative safety of the pine forest. Only then did Eleanor give voice to the emotions that had been building since witnessing Morrison's condition. "Those monsters," she whispered fiercely. "We need to implement our plan immediately." "Not immediately," Reeves cautioned. "Night approaches. Moving through this terrain in darkness invites disaster, and attempting a rescue without proper visibility compounds the risk unnecessarily." "But you saw how they treated him." "I did," the Marshal cut her off, his voice gentle despite the firmness of his words. "And I understand your urgency, but Morrison has endured 2 weeks of captivity. Rushing in unprepared won't help him. If we fail, there will be no second chance." Eleanor wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in his assessment. "First light tomorrow, then," she conceded. "Not a moment later." "Agreed. We'll finalize our strategy tonight and move into position before dawn." Reeves glanced at the darkening sky. "We should return to the cabin now. Navigation becomes challenging once the light fails completely." The journey back seemed longer, fatigue and emotional strain taking their toll as they trudged through deepening shadows. Eleanor's mind replayed the scene of Morrison's mistreatment, strengthening her resolve to see this rescue attempt through, despite the evident dangers. The warm glow of firelight greeted them as the cabin came into view, a sight that momentarily confused them both. "Sullivan must have recovered enough to tend the fire," Eleanor suggested as they approached cautiously. Reeves drew his revolver, suddenly alert. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we have visitors." He motioned for Eleanor to stay behind him as they crept toward the cabin window, positioning themselves to peer inside without being immediately visible to anyone within. The scene that greeted them froze the blood in Eleanor's veins. Owen Sullivan was indeed awake, seated upright in a chair near the hearth, but the pistol pressed against his temple explained his rigid posture. Holding the weapon was a lean, hollow-cheeked man whose nervous eyes continually darted toward the cabin door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. "Jed Harmon," Reeves whispered, "Blackwell's youngest gang member, jumpy, unpredictable, and apparently separated from the main group." "How did he find the cabin?" Eleanor breathed. "Likely followed Sullivan's trail before the storm covered it." "Completely." Reeves assessed the situation with the calm calculation of experienced lawman. "This complicates our plan, but might also create opportunity. Wait here." Before Eleanor could object, Reeves had circled toward the rear of the cabin, disappearing into the gathering darkness. She remained frozen in place, watching helplessly, as Sullivan's captor grew visibly more agitated with each passing minute, occasionally shouting questions that Sullivan appeared to answer with deliberate calm, despite the weapon threatening his life. Time stretched endlessly until a sudden crash from within the cabin drew her attention. Harmon had whirled toward some sound from the bedroom area, his gun momentarily wavering from Sullivan's head. In that instant, the cabin door burst open and Reeves appeared, revolver aimed with deadly precision. "Federal Marshal, drop your weapon," he commanded. What happened next unfolded with bewildering speed. Harmon spun back, firing wildly in Reeves's direction. The Marshal returned fire but staggered as Harmon's bullet found its mark. Sullivan lunged from his chair despite his weakened condition, grappling with Harmon for control of the pistol. Another shot exploded in the confined space. Eleanor rushed forward as both men collapsed to the floor, Sullivan falling heavily across Harmon's now still form. Blood spread in an alarming pool beneath them as Reeves stumbled against the doorframe, clutching his side where a fresh wound stained his coat crimson. Their carefully constructed rescue plan had just imploded before it could even begin. "Don't move," Eleanor commanded, helping Reeves to a chair while keeping one eye on the fallen men. The Marshal's face had gone alarmingly pale, his breathing shallow as he pressed a hand against his bleeding side. "Check Sullivan," he gasped. "Harmon's dead." Eleanor knelt beside the two entangled figures, carefully rolling Sullivan off the motionless outlaw. The bullet that had ended their struggle had passed cleanly through Harmon's chest, but had also torn through Sullivan's shoulder, leaving a ragged wound that bled steadily. "He's alive, but unconscious," she reported, quickly tearing strips from her petticoat to create temporary bandages. "The bullet went through his shoulder. You grazed my ribs," Reeves managed, though his grimace belied the casual assessment. "Painful, but not immediately life-threatening." Eleanor worked with swift efficiency, her father's medical training guiding her actions as she addressed the most urgent needs first. She managed to slow Sullivan's bleeding with direct pressure and careful bandaging before turning her attention to Reeves's wound. "Remove your coat and shirt," she instructed, stoking the fire to provide better light for her impromptu surgery. As he complied with obvious difficulty, she gathered Morrison's medical supplies, thankfully more extensive than she had expected for a frontier homestead. The wound, once exposed, proved more serious than Reeves had admitted. The bullet had carved a deep furrow across his lower ribs, narrowly missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. Eleanor cleaned the injury methodically, using whiskey from Morrison's stores as disinfectant before applying a poultice. "Of herbs, similar to those Martha Blackwood had provided. This requires stitches," she announced, threading a curved needle from Morrison's medical kit. Reeves nodded grimly. "Do what's necessary." His stoicism during the painful procedure impressed her, though beads of sweat on his forehead betrayed his suffering. When she finally tied off the last stitch and secured a clean bandage around his torso, she allowed herself a moment of relief before addressing their deteriorating strategic situation. "Harmon's presence changes everything," she stated, washing blood from her hands in a basin of melted snow water. "Blackwell will notice his absence. If he was supposed to return to their camp tonight, they'll come looking by morning at the latest," Reeves finished, accepting a measure of whiskey with a grateful nod. "And they'll follow his tracks directly to this cabin." Eleanor moved to the window, peering out at the moonlit landscape. The temperature had continued its precipitous drop, stars glittering with cold brilliance in a cloudless sky. "Could we move Sullivan? Find another shelter?" Reeves shook his head. "Not in his condition, not in this cold. Besides, there's nowhere within reach that offers better security than these walls." She turned back to face him, frustration evident in her posture. "So we're trapped, waiting for killers to find us, with 2 injured men to protect and the original hostage still suffering in that mine." "The situation isn't ideal," Reeves acknowledged, with characteristic understatement. Eleanor began pacing, her practical mind refusing to accept defeat. "We need to adapt our strategy. The diversion plan is compromised, but perhaps—" She paused, a new possibility forming. "What if we make this cabin the diversion?" Reeves looked up sharply. "Explain." "Harmon found us. His companions will follow. Instead of attempting to draw them away from the mine, we prepare for their arrival. Here, but on our terms." Her eyes gleamed with determined intelligence. "We make them believe Harmon discovered the lost gold here, was killed for it by rivals. Create evidence suggesting the treasure was removed by these fictional rivals who fled during the confrontation. Leaving a trail for Blackwell to follow away from both the cabin and the mine," Reeves continued, understanding her concept. "While I circle back to free Morrison during their pursuit." "Precisely," Eleanor's confidence grew as the plan took shape. We have until morning at most. We need to stage this cabin convincingly, create a false trail, and get you positioned near the mine before Blackwell's men arrive. Despite his injury, a spark of professional appreciation appeared in Reeves' eyes. It's audacious, risky, but it might work if we execute it perfectly. They set to work immediately, acutely aware of how little time remained before dawn might bring unwelcome visitors. First, they moved Sullivan to Morrison's bedroom, positioning him comfortably on the bed, where he could remain hidden during the crucial first moments when Blackwell's men would investigate the cabin. Next came the staged scene. They positioned Harmon's body near an open trapdoor they discovered beneath the kitchen table, likely Morrison's root cellar for storing vegetables through the winter. Eleanor scattered a handful of gold coins around the opening, allowing a few to fall into the earthen space below. Another small collection of coins was placed in Harmon's pocket, along with a crudely drawn map showing the cabin's location circled in charcoal. The scenario we're creating, Eleanor explained as she worked, is that Harmon discovered Peterson's gold was hidden here all along, beneath Morrison's cabin. He sent a message to Blackwell but became greedy, planning to claim a larger share for himself. Unknown parties, perhaps the original thieves returning for their loot, interrupted him, leading to a fatal confrontation. We'll need evidence of multiple visitors, Reeves noted, inspecting their staged tableau with a critical eye. Different boot prints, signs of struggle beyond just Harmon and Sullivan. Eleanor nodded, already considering solutions. I'll create additional tracks using Morrison's spare boots. We can disorder furniture, break a window to suggest forced entry from unknown parties. The important element is convincing Blackwell the gold was here but has been recently moved, which is where your false trail becomes crucial, Reeves added. It needs to be obvious enough for Blackwell to follow in his initial anger, yet lead him far from both Morrison and us. The hours passed in focused activity as they refined their deception. Eleanor sacrificed more of her gold to create a convincing display, while Reeves, despite his injury, managed to stage evidence of a violent confrontation throughout the cabin. They worked methodically, discussing each detail to ensure their fabricated scenario would withstand scrutiny from experienced criminals. By the time the eastern sky began lightening toward dawn, exhaustion pulled at them both. Sullivan had remained mercifully unconscious throughout their preparations, his condition stable, though concerning. The false trail is our final task, Reeves said, checking his revolver and gathering minimal supplies. I'll create tracks heading east toward Blackwater Pass, scattering occasional gold coins as if dropped during a hasty retreat. Once I've laid sufficient evidence, I'll circle back toward the mine using the route we scouted yesterday. Eleanor frowned. Your wound is painful but manageable, he interrupted firmly. Miss Caldwell, I've operated under worse conditions. The alternative is abandoning Morrison to certain death. She recognized the futility of arguing. What's my role once you've departed? Remain here with Sullivan. When Blackwell's men arrive, and they will, likely before midday, stay hidden. Allow them to discover Harmon and draw their own conclusions from our staged scene. Their primary focus will be pursuing the apparent gold thieves, but they may search the cabin thoroughly first. And if they find me, Reeves's expression hardened, use this. He handed her his backup revolver, smaller than his primary weapon, but deadly at close range. 5 shots, make them count if necessary. Eleanor accepted the firearm with grim resolve. How long should I wait? After they depart, give them at least 2 hours to ensure they don't double back. Then harness Morrison's team to his sled and bring Sullivan to the Henderson homestead. Sullivan mentioned, it's approximately 5 miles northeast according to Morrison's journal. They can provide proper medical care and send for authorities. What about you and Morrison? If successful, I'll extract him through the ventilation shaft as planned. We'll make our way to the Henderson place by nightfall." He hesitated, clearly weighing his next words. "If we haven't arrived by morning, proceed to Larksburg Creek without us." The implication hung heavy between them. Elena rejected it immediately. "I'll wait as long as necessary at the Hendersons. All of us leave these mountains together, or not at all." Something flickered in Reeves's grey eyes. Respect, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he quickly masked. "Stubborn Easterner," he murmured. The phrase somehow transformed from criticism to something approaching admiration. "Determined survivor," she corrected, helping him into his coat with careful movements to avoid aggravating his wound. Dawn had broken fully by the time final preparations were complete. Reeves stood at the cabin door, checking his weapons one last time before meeting Eleanor's eyes. If anything goes wrong, if Blackwell suspects the deception or splits his men instead of pursuing the false trail— "I'll manage," she interrupted, confidently. "Focus on rescuing Morrison." He nodded, seeming about to say something more before apparently thinking better of it. With a final assessing look around the carefully staged cabin, he stepped into the bitter morning air and disappeared into the surrounding forest. Eleanor watched until his form vanished among the snow-laden trees, then secured the cabin door and completed her own preparations. She gathered the small valise containing her remaining belongings, tucking Reeves's revolver within easy reach. Morrison's journal and her gold, what remained after their elaborate deception, were carefully secured in her clothing and bags. Moving to the bedroom where Sullivan lay, she checked his condition. His breathing remained steady, though fever flushed his cheeks. The wound had thankfully stopped bleeding, her careful bandaging holding firm. "We'll be moving soon, Mr. Sullivan," she told him, though he showed no sign of hearing. "Help is coming, for your brother-in-law." The next hours passed with excruciating slowness. Eleanor positioned herself at the bedroom window, which offered a clear view of the approach to the cabin without exposing her to outside observation. She kept Reeves's revolver in her lap, rehearsing its operation in her mind while straining to detect any sound that might herald Blackwell's arrival. When they finally came, it was with less caution than she had anticipated. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, approaching directly rather than circling to check for potential threats. Their confidence suggested they expected to find only Harmon, perhaps with information about Morrison's continued resistance. To interrogation, she recognized Blackwell from their surveillance, the largest of the 3, with the distinctive scarred face and limping gait as he dismounted and approached the cabin. The others flanked him, rifles ready, but not aimed with particular urgency. They clearly weren't expecting trouble. Eleanor withdrew deeper into the shadows of the bedroom as Blackwell pounded on the cabin door. When no response came, he signaled to one of his men, who moved forward to test the latch. Finding it unlocked, as they had deliberately left it, the outlaw pushed the door open cautiously. What followed unfolded exactly as they had hoped. She could hear Blackwell's shout of surprise at discovering Harmon's body, followed by rapid movements as the outlaws investigated the staged scene. Their voices carried clearly in the cold air, confusion and anger evident in their tones as they pieced together the scenario Eleanor and Reeves had so carefully constructed. "Must have found it under the damn floor. These coins are real. Enough. Looks like multiple men stormed the place." Blackwell's voice rose above the others, authority and rage mingling in his commands. "Check the entire cabin. Find anything that tells us who did this and where they've gone." Eleanor tensed as heavy footsteps approached the bedroom. She slid beneath Morrison's bed, pressing herself against the wall, revolver clutched tightly. The door swung open, and boots stomped across the floorboards, stopping abruptly with a startled curse as they discovered Sullivan. "Boss, there's another man in here, still alive." Blackwell's distinctive uneven stride entered the room. "That's Sullivan, Morrison's kin. He must have been part of it." She heard the sounds of rough handling as they shook the semi-conscious man. "Wake up, Sullivan! Where's the gold? Who took it?" Sullivan's response was unintelligible, his condition preventing coherent answers despite the outlaw's increasingly violent demands. After several frustrated minutes, Blackwell ordered his men to stop. "He's useless like this," the gang leader growled. "And we're wasting time. Whoever took that gold has hours on us already." "What about Morrison?" one of the others asked. "Should we bring him along? Might still know something useful." Blackwell's response chilled Eleanor despite her concealment. "He's more liability than asset now. Put a bullet in him before we ride out. No loose ends." "And this one?" The question accompanied what sounded like a rough kick to Sullivan's bed. "Too far gone to be a threat. We'll deal with him when we return. After we've caught those double-crossing thieves, check outside for tracks. They couldn't have moved that much gold without leaving a trail." The men departed the bedroom, their heavy footsteps moving through the cabin and then outside. Through the slats beneath the bed, Eleanor could see booted feet passing back and forth before the window as they discovered the false trail Reeves had created. Their excited voices confirmed the deception was working. "Tracks heading east toward the pass. Found another coin here in the snow. Multiple horses, moving fast but heavy. They're carrying weight." Blackwell's voice rose above the others, issuing rapid commands. "Mount up. We can catch them before they reach the pass if we ride hard." A pause, then, "Jennings, go put Morrison down, then join us on the trail. Don't waste time. Clean shot to the head and ride. We've got gold to recover." Eleanor remained frozen beneath the bed, scarcely breathing as one rider departed toward the mine, while the others thundered eastward, following Reeves's false trail. Only when the sounds of hoofbeats had faded completely did she emerge from hiding, moving immediately to check Sullivan before rushing to the window. In the distance, she could see two riders disappearing into the tree line, following the eastern path. The third, Jennings, was visible heading in the opposite direction, toward the mine where James Morrison awaited execution. And somewhere in between, working his way through the snow-covered forest, was Marshal Reeves, injured, outnumbered, and unaware that his rescue mission had just become a desperate race against a killer, with explicit orders to eliminate the very man they were trying to save. Eleanor's decision was instantaneous and irrevocable. She couldn't allow Morrison to be executed while waiting safely in the cabin, not when she might have the power to prevent it. Rushing to the bedroom, she checked Sullivan one last time, ensuring his bandages were secure before tucking blankets around his still form. "I'll return as soon as possible," she told him, though he remained unconscious. "Hold on, Mr. Sullivan." Moving with focused efficiency, she gathered essential supplies. Reeves's revolver, her remaining gold coins, a small flask of water, and Morrison's spare hunting knife, which she secured in her boot. She donned her warmest outer garments, grateful for the practical winter clothing she'd acquired for frontier living. Outside, the morning air bit with crystalline sharpness, her breath forming dense clouds as she hurried toward the stable. Inside, she found Morrison's two draft horses, powerful animals bred for work rather than speed, but sturdy and reliable in difficult terrain. She harnessed the smaller of the pair with quick, practiced movements, blessing her foresight in learning basic horsemanship before leaving Boston. "We need to move fast, but quiet," she murmured to the horse as she led it from the stable, mounting with determined grace despite her restrictive clothing. Rather than following either the false trail eastward or the direct path taken by Jennings, Eleanor chose a third route. During their planning, Reeves had mentioned a game trail that curved northwest through a stand of dense pines before connecting with the old mining road closer to the ventilation shaft he planned to use for Morrison's rescue. This path would allow her to intercept Jennings before he reached the mine, or at least reach Reeves to warn him of the immediate threat. The horse picked its way carefully through the snow-laden forest, Eleanor guiding it with gentle pressure. from her knees while keeping both hands free, one steadying herself against the saddle horn, the other ready to access the revolver if needed. The silence of the winter woods enveloped them, broken only by the soft crunch of hooves on snow and the occasional distant crack of frost-strained tree limbs. Despite her focused determination, Eleanor couldn't help reflecting on the extraordinary transformation of her circumstances. Barely 3 days ago, she'd been a mail-order bride journeying to meet her future husband, her most pressing concern whether James Morrison would find her suitable as a frontier wife. Now, she rode through a Montana wilderness, armed and alone, attempting to prevent the execution of the man she had traveled so far to marry, a man she still had never met. The irony might have amused her under different circumstances. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. Whatever came after this day, whether Morrison lived or died, whether he still wished to marry her or circumstances dictated other paths, she would face it, knowing she had done everything possible to honor the commitment that had brought her west. The game trail narrowed as it climbed a gradual slope, forcing Eleanor to duck beneath low-hanging evergreen branches heavy with snow. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of the broader landscape through gaps in the trees, the white expanse of Morrison's meadow falling away behind her, the rugged hills rising ahead where the abandoned Frederick's mine waited. A sudden sound froze her in place, the distant but distinct crack of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. Fear clutched at her heart. Had she already arrived too late? Was that Jennings carrying out Blackwell's execution order, or perhaps Reeves, forced to defend himself during his rescue attempt? Abandoning caution, Eleanor urged her mount forward at a faster pace, navigating the increasingly steep terrain with single-minded focus. The trail widened as it joined an old logging path, allowing somewhat easier progress as they approached the ridge overlooking the mining operation. When the trees finally thinned enough to provide a clear view of the area below, Eleanor reined in sharply, assessing the situation before revealing her presence. The mine entrance was visible approximately 200 yards away, with Jennings's horse tethered to a scrub pine nearby. The outlaw himself was nowhere in sight. Presumably, already inside the tunnel, on his grim mission, Eleanor scanned the surroundings desperately, searching for any sign of Reeves. According to their plan, he should have approached from the north, seeking the ventilation shaft that would allow him access to the mine's interior. That route would have kept him out of sight from her current position. Precious seconds ticked by as she weighed her limited options. Waiting for Reeves risked Morrison's immediate execution. Approaching the main entrance meant confronting Jennings directly, an armed and experienced killer. Searching for the ventilation shaft might allow her to warn Reeves, but could waste valuable time if he had already entered the mine. The decision was made for her when another sound carried across the snow-covered landscape. Not a gunshot this time, but the unmistakable noise of a physical struggle echoing from within the mine tunnel. Without further hesitation, Eleanor dismounted, secured her horse to a sturdy pine, and withdrew Reeves's revolver. Checking that it was loaded and ready as he had taught her, she began making her way carefully down the slope toward the mine. Entrance, the approach, left her terrifyingly exposed, each step across the open snowfield seeming to announce her presence to unseen watchers. But no challenge came. No warning shots. Either Jennings was too occupied with his current task to maintain watch, or her luck was holding. She reached the tethered horse without incident, noting with grim satisfaction that Jennings had left his rifle secured in its saddle holster, overconfident in his ability to dispatch a weakened prisoner with his sidearm alone. The sounds of conflict from within had ceased, replaced by an ominous silence that propelled her forward with renewed urgency. The mine entrance loomed before her, a dark rectangular void in the hillside, its timber support beams weathered but still solid. Eleanor paused at the threshold, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimness within. A lantern burned some distance down the main tunnel, casting long shadows across rough-hewn walls, reinforced with occasional wooden bracing. Drawing a steadying breath, she stepped inside, moving as quietly as possible along the earthen floor. The air grew noticeably warmer away from the entrance, though it carried unpleasant odors, damp earth, unwashed bodies, the metallic tang of blood. She advanced cautiously, revolver held ready as Reeves had demonstrated, straining to detect any sound that might reveal what awaited ahead. The tunnel curved slightly before opening into a larger chamber where mining equipment had once been stored. The lantern she had glimpsed hung from a hook on the wall, illuminating a scene that momentarily stopped her heart. Two men lay motionless on the ground, one face down in a spreading pool of blood, the other slumped against the far wall, head bowed. A third figure knelt beside this second man, working urgently at the ropes binding his wrists. "Reeves!" Eleanor breathed, recognizing the Marshal despite the exhaustion and pain evident in his posture. His head snapped up at her voice, disbelief washing across his features. "Eleanor, what in God's name—" "Blackwell sent Jennings to kill Morrison," she explained rapidly, hurrying forward while keeping the revolver trained on the motionless outlaw. "Is he—" "Dead," Reeves confirmed grimly. "Caught him by surprise. As he was about to execute Morrison, he gestured toward his own bloodied knuckles, had to do it quietly, didn't want to alert anyone else who might be nearby." Eleanor knelt beside the slumped figure she now realized must be James Morrison. In the lantern's yellow glow, she finally beheld the man whose thoughtful letters had drawn her across a continent. His face was barely recognizable beneath layers of dried blood and newly forming bruises. His once neat beard had grown wild during captivity, and his clothes hung in filthy tatters from a frame grown gaunt through deprivation. Yet despite this dire condition, she noted the strong line of his jaw, the intelligent brow now furrowed in pain or unconsciousness, the hands that revealed both strength and refinement, even bound and bloodied. This was indeed the complex man she had come to know through his correspondence, part frontier settler, part educated thinker. "Is he alive?" she asked, reaching tentatively toward him. "Barely," Reeves answered, finally freeing Morrison's wrists. "From their cruel bindings, they've worked him over systematically, probably daily since his capture. Remarkable he's survived this long." As if responding to their voices, Morrison's eyelids fluttered. A low groan escaped his cracked lips as consciousness returned, bringing with it awareness of his numerous injuries. "Easy," Reeves murmured. "You're safe now. We're getting you out of here." Morrison's eyes opened fully, a startling blue that stood out starkly against his battered face. His gaze moved uncomprehendingly from Reeves to Eleanor, confusion evident in his expression. "Who?" he managed, his voice a painful rasp from dehydration and likely screaming. "Marshal Daniel Reeves," the lawman supplied, "and this is Miss Eleanor Caldwell." Recognition flickered in Morrison's eyes at her name, followed by something approaching wonder. "Eleanor," he whispered. "You came?" The simple question, laden with disbelief and something like hope, threatened to unravel her hard-won composure. "Of course I came," she replied softly. "Your letters were very persuasive." A ghost of a smile touched his broken lips, before pain reasserted itself, drawing another groan from his depleted reserves. "We need to move quickly," Reeves interrupted. "All business, despite the emotional moment. Blackwell and his remaining men followed our false trail east, but they'll realize the deception eventually. We should be long gone before they return." Eleanor helped position Morrison between them, supporting his weight as he struggled to stand on legs, weakened by confinement and abuse. Each movement clearly caused him significant pain, but he made no complaint, summoning remarkable strength from somewhere deep within. "My brother-in-law," Morrison managed, as they began their slow progress toward the mine entrance. "Owen came to warn—" Sullivan found us, Eleanor assured him. He's injured but alive at your homestead. Relief passed across Morrison's face, followed quickly by alarm. Gold, he gasped. They think, I know, Peterson's shipment. We're aware, Reeves said grimly. In fact, we use that belief to create our diversion. Right now, Blackwell thinks someone else found the gold at your cabin and fled east with it. They emerged from the mine into blinding daylight that caused Morrison to wince despite his evident effort to remain stoic. The cold air seemed to revive him somewhat, his breathing deepening, though each inhalation clearly pained his likely broken ribs. My horse is just beyond that ridge, Eleanor said, indicating the slope she had descended. And Jennings's mount is here. Between them we should manage. Reeves glanced at the sky, assessing the sun's position. Nearly noon. If all went as planned, Blackwell and his men are miles east by now, following our false trail. With luck, we can reach the Henderson place by nightfall, as originally intended. The logistics of mounting proved challenging with Morrison's injuries and Reeves's own wounded state. After several painful attempts, they managed to position Morrison on Jennings's horse, with Reeves riding behind to support his weakened frame. Eleanor reclaimed her borrowed mount, leading the way back along the game trail she had followed earlier. As they picked their way carefully through the snow-laden forest, Eleanor glanced occasionally at Morrison, still scarcely believing she had finally found the man whose words had drawn her west. Despite his grievous condition, or perhaps because of the strength with which he endured it, she found herself confirming her earlier impressions. This was indeed someone of substance, complexity, and remarkable resilience. "Thank you, Morrison," said softly when he caught her watching him during one such moment. "Coming all this way, then this." His words were halting, each clearly requiring significant effort. "Not what I promised in my letters." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied with genuine warmth, "you described a life requiring courage, adaptability, and partnership. So far, that description has proven remarkably accurate." A hint of his true self showed through the pain and exhaustion then, a flash of intelligence and even humor in those striking blue eyes. "Hope to demonstrate those qualities under better circumstances. There will be time for proper demonstrations later," she assured him, surprising herself with the certainty she felt about this promise. Whatever uncertainties the future held, Eleanor found herself unwilling to relinquish the connection that had brought her to this moment. They continued, in silence for some time, conserving strength and focusing on the challenging terrain. When they finally emerged from the forest into the open meadow surrounding Morrison's homestead, the sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains, casting long blue shadows across the pristine snow. "Home," Morrison whispered. A wealth of emotion in the single word as he gazed upon the cabin he had built with his own hands, the home that had nearly become his tomb through Blackwell's cruel interrogation. "And Sullivan's still inside," Eleanor reminded them, anxiety returning as she recalled the injured man's condition when she had left him hours earlier. "We need to assess his wounds properly, then prepare for immediate departure to the Henderson place as planned." Reeves nodded grimly. "The sooner we're away from here, the better. Blackwell may already have realized our deception." As they approached the cabin, however, Eleanor noticed something that stopped her progress entirely. Fresh tracks in the snow, multiple. Horses and what appeared to be a sleigh or sled led directly to the cabin door, which now stood partially open. "We have visitors," she warned, reaching for the revolver concealed beneath her coat. Reeves immediately moved their horses behind the shelter of the stable, positioning himself protectively before Morrison, despite his own injuries. "Stay here," he instructed. "I'll investigate. We go together," Eleanor countered firmly. "I've had quite enough of separating when danger threatens." Before he could argue, the cabin door swung fully open. A tall figure emerged onto the porch, an older man with a snow-white beard and the weathered complexion of a long-time mountain dweller. He carried a shotgun, but held it non-threateningly at his side. "That'll be far enough, strangers," he called, squinting in their direction. "State your business." Morrison straightened despite obvious pain, raising his voice with effort. "Henderson, it's James Morrison." The change in the older man's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. "Morrison, good God!" He turned to shout over his shoulder into the cabin. "Martha, it's Morrison, and he's with others." Within moments, the yard erupted into activity as Henderson hurried toward them, followed by a stout woman with practical clothing and the confident movements of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. Two younger men, presumably Henderson's sons or hands, appeared with weapons ready but not aimed. "James Morrison, you look like you've been dragged behind a wild Mustang for a week," Henderson declared, helping Reeves ease the injured man from the horse. "Martha, get your kit. This man needs tending immediately." "Owen Sullivan's inside as well," Eleanor explained as the capable-looking woman assessed Morrison's condition with practiced efficiency. "Gunshot wound to the shoulder, approximately 8 hours old. Already tended him," Martha Henderson replied briskly. "Found him half delirious when we arrived an hour ago. Managed to tell us enough to piece together you'd gone after James." She cast an appraising eye over Reeves's blood-stained shirt. "Seems you didn't escape unscathed either, mister." "Marshal Daniel Reeves," he introduced himself with palpable relief at finding unexpected allies. "And this is Miss Eleanor Caldwell." "Morrison's mail-order bride," Henderson nodded, recognition dawning. "Sullivan mentioned you between fever. Dreams, said you were quite something." His eyes twinkled despite the gravity of the situation. Appears he understated the case considerably." Before Eleanor could respond, Martha took command of the situation with the authority of a frontier woman accustomed to emergencies. "Explanations can wait. These men need immediate medical attention. Boys, help the Marshal and Mr. Morrison inside. Miss Caldwell, you look dead on your feet as well. Come, we've brought provisions and medicine. Once everyone's tended, we can discuss next steps." As they moved toward the cabin's welcoming warmth, Eleanor felt the accumulated tension of the past days begin to ease slightly. They had found Morrison alive, they had escaped the mine, and now, unexpectedly, reinforcements had arrived in the form of neighbors whose capability and preparedness suggested they were well equipped to handle frontier emergencies. Yet one shadow remained, tempering her relief. Somewhere to the east, Samuel Blackwell and his remaining men pursued a false trail. Eventually, they would discover the deception and return, enraged and seeking vengeance against those who had outsmarted them. Their ordeal was not yet over. Inside Morrison's cabin, the atmosphere had transformed from one of desperate strategy to ordered recovery. Martha Henderson moved between the injured men with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands gentle yet firm as she assessed wounds and applied remedies from her substantial medical kit. The main room now resembled a field hospital, with Morrison occupying his own bed, Sullivan resting on a pallet near the hearth, and Reeves seated at the table while Martha cleaned and redressed his injuries. Eleanor helped where needed, following Martha's directions while struggling to process the rapid evolution of their situation. Her gaze returned frequently to Morrison, who drifted between consciousness and exhausted sleep as Martha tended his numerous injuries. Despite his battered condition, Eleanor found herself studying the man whose thoughtful letters had drawn her across the continent, noting the intelligence in his eyes during lucid moments, the strength evident even in his weakened state. 3 broken ribs, shoulder likely dislocated then roughly reset, extensive bruising, dehydration and exhaustion, Martha reported after completing her examination. Remarkable he's alive after such treatment, let alone conscious. Will he recover? Eleanor asked quietly. Martha's expression softened briefly. He's strong and was healthy before this ordeal. With proper care and time, yes. She glanced toward Sullivan. His brother-in-law's wound is cleaner, through and through, with minimal tissue damage, fevers concerning but responding to treatment. Hiram Henderson had positioned his sons as sentries, one watching the eastern approach where Blackwell might return, another monitoring the trail toward Larksburg Creek. The elder Henderson himself now joined them at the table, his expression grave as Reeves summarized recent events and their current predicament. The false trail bought us time, the Marshal concluded, but Blackwell's not a fool. Once they reach Blackwater Pass and find no sign of riders continuing east, they'll realize the deception. How long? Henderson asked bluntly. Reeves calculated mentally. They've been following the trail for approximately 6 hours, allowing for their initial pace and the time needed to reach the pass and search enough to confirm it's false. He shook his head grimly. They could be heading back by nightfall, here by morning at the latest. Then we move tonight, Henderson decided. I brought my large sledge, anticipating casualties. We can transport Morrison and Sullivan to our homestead. 8 miles northeast and well defensible. Martha can continue treatment there while I send my eldest to Granite Peak Settlement for the sheriff and additional men. Eleanor joined the conversation, her exhaustion temporarily set aside. Marshal, Reeves and I discovered evidence connecting Blackwell to multiple crimes, kidnapping, attempted murder, and likely the killing of those guards during the train robbery in Wyoming. Would this documentation help ensure they're properly prosecuted when captured? Assuming they're captured alive, Henderson noted with frontier pragmatism. Justice is preferable to bloodshed, Reeves stated firmly. These men deserve trial and lawful punishment for their crimes. Henderson studied the Marshal with newfound respect. Admirable sentiment from a man they shot twice in 3 days. As darkness fell, they implemented their evacuation plan with methodical efficiency. The large sledge Henderson had brought proved spacious enough for both injured men, with thick furs and blankets protecting them from the bitter cold. Martha traveled alongside them, maintaining vigilant watch over her patients. Reeves insisted on riding scout position despite his injuries, while Eleanor joined Henderson on the driver's bench. Morrison spoke of you in his infrequent visits to our place, Henderson remarked as they guided the sledge carefully through moonlit forest trails. Said he'd found a woman of remarkable intelligence and spirit through correspondence. Wondered if frontier reality might disappoint after cultivated Boston society. Eleanor watched the passing shadows, considering her response. Boston offered security but little fulfillment. I sought purpose more than comfort. She adjusted her scarf against the frigid air. Recent events have certainly provided abundant challenge, if not conventional comfort. Henderson chuckled softly. Frontier life distilled to its essence. Challenge, abundant, comfort scarce. His expression grew more serious. You're not what most would expect in a mail-order bride, Miss Caldwell. I've discovered I'm not what I expected either, she replied thoughtfully. The Henderson homestead proved considerably larger than Morrison's cabin, a sprawling structure built in phases over many years with multiple outbuildings and defensible impositions. By the time they arrived, both Morrison and Sullivan had slipped into exhausted sleep, oblivious to their transfer indoors to prepared beds in the main house's large common room. Eleanor found herself guided to a small but comfortable bedroom by Martha, who insisted she rest while the men established watches and security measures. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, Eleanor succumbed to bone-deep fatigue almost immediately, the events of recent days finally exacting their toll. She awakened to grey dawn light and the distant sound of men's voices in urgent conversation. Dressing quickly, she emerged to find Reeves and Henderson poring over a crude map spread across the kitchen table. Riders approaching from the southwest, Reeves informed her without preamble. Henderson's son spotted them crossing the lower valley, 5 men moving fast despite the snow. Blackwell's found our trail. The sledge tracks would be obvious, Eleanor noted, mentally calculating. How long? Hour, maybe less, Henderson replied. My youngest rode for Granite Peak at first light, but sheriff's reinforcements won't arrive before midday at earliest. Reeves straightened, checking his revolver with methodical precision. We're 7 capable fighters, including Henderson's hands. Defensible position, good visibility. We can hold until help arrives. Eleanor moved to the window, observing the homestead's layout with tactical consideration that would have been foreign to her mere days ago. And our injured? Room at the center of the house, furthest from potential gunfire, Henderson assured her. Martha's with them now. The preparations that followed demonstrated the frontier settlers' readiness for adversity. Firing positions were established, weapons distributed, water and ammunition staged at key points. Eleanor found herself armed with a Winchester rifle after demonstrating surprising proficiency during Henderson's brief assessment. My father believed women should protect themselves, she explained at his raised eyebrow, conventional in many ways, but progressive regarding self-reliance. When she checked on Morrison, she found him awake, his blue eyes clearer than before, though pain remained etched in his features. You should be elsewhere, he managed, watching her check the rifle's loading mechanism. Safer. I've discovered elsewhere and safer are largely illusory concepts, she replied with a small smile, especially in Montana territory. His hand moved slightly on the blanket, an invitation she accepted, placing her fingers lightly over his. Not how I planned our first meeting, he said softly. Few relationships follow their intended path. Eleanor observed, the measure lies in how we navigate unexpected turns. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Reeves's sharp call from the front of the house. Riders in sight. Everyone to positions. Eleanor squeezed Morrison's hand. Once before rising, rest, we'll handle this. The confrontation that followed unfolded with surprising swiftness. Blackwell and his remaining men approached with the overconfidence of those accustomed to intimidating isolated homesteaders. Their shock at finding the Henderson place fully prepared for their arrival was evident in their hasty retreat to defensive positions when the first warning shots struck the ground before their horses. Federal Marshal! Reeves's voice rang out across the snow-covered yard. You're surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender your weapons. Blackwell's answering laugh held no humor. That you, Reeves? Still bleeding from our last meeting? His voice hardened. Send out Morrison and that interfering woman, then maybe we discuss terms. No terms except your surrender, Henderson called back. Sheriff's men are already riding from Granite Peak. What began as negotiation devolved rapidly into sporadic gunfire. Blackwell's men testing the homestead's defenses while searching for weaknesses. Eleanor maintained her position at an upstairs window, firing only when targets presented clear opportunities, conserving ammunition as Henderson had instructed. The standoff might have continued for hours, had fate not intervened in unexpected form. As mid-morning approached, new sounds carried across the valley, multiple horses approaching at speed from the east. Eleanor's heart leapt, expecting the promised reinforcements from Granite Peak. Instead, through her window, she glimpsed riders in distinctive blue uniforms cresting the ridge. A cavalry patrol from Fort Kearney. Their approach undetected by Blackwell's men, who remained focused on the homestead. What followed resembled a well-executed pincer movement. The cavalry lieutenant, having spotted the ongoing confrontation, deployed his 12-man patrol with tactical precision. Caught between disciplined cavalry fire and the homestead defenders, Blackwell's position collapsed within minutes. When the outlaw leader finally threw down his weapon in surrender, his remaining men quickly followed suit. The cavalry, efficiently, disarmed and secured them, while their lieutenant approached the homestead, Lieutenant Thomas Mercer, Fort Kearney Patrol. The young officer introduced himself as Henderson welcomed him inside. Fortuitous timing, it appears. Providential, Henderson agreed. Though I'm curious what brings Army Patrol this far from established routes. Investigating reports of outlaws possibly connected to the Peterson gold shipment robbery years back, Mercer explained. Territorial governors taken personal interest since Army payroll was involved when we encountered a rider from Granite Peak reporting armed confrontation at your homestead. Reeves stepped forward, officially identifying himself and briefly summarizing Blackwell's crimes. The lieutenant's expression grew increasingly grave as he recognized the significance of their prisoners. The Blackwell gang has been wanted across 3 territories, he acknowledged. We'll transport them to Fort Kearney immediately for holding, until proper authorities arrange transfer for trial. As the cavalry prepared for departure with their prisoners, Eleanor found herself once again at Morrison's bedside. The commotion had awakened him, his eyes alert despite his weakened condition. Blackwell, he asked simply. Captured, she assured him, along with his remaining men. A cavalry patrol arrived unexpectedly. Relief washed across his features. Then it's over. This particular chapter, yes. Eleanor settled beside him, surprising herself with the ease she felt in his presence, despite their brief acquaintance. Though I suspect Montana Territory will provide further adventures. Morrison studied her face with careful attention. After all this, no one would fault you for returning east, Eleanor. The life described in my letters seems almost quaint compared to what you've experienced. She considered his words thoughtfully before responding. Your letters promise challenge, purpose and partnership. Recent events, while extreme, have only confirmed those promises. Her hand found his again, the contact simple yet meaningful. I came west, seeking not comfort, but a meaningful life fully lived. I found the beginning of that here. The smile that transformed his battered face spoke volumes about the man beneath the injuries, resilient, thoughtful, capable of profound appreciation. Then perhaps when I'm somewhat more presentable, we might properly begin the courtship that brought you across a continent. I believe we've already begun, Eleanor replied with quiet certainty. The circumstances proved unusual, but the essentials remained clear. Through the window, morning sunlight spilled across the snow-covered landscape, transforming the wilderness that had nearly claimed their lives into a vista of breathtaking beauty. Like the territory itself, their path forward would contain both hardship and wonder, challenges balanced by moments of surprising grace. Eleanor Caldwell, who had journeyed west with a fortune in gold hidden in her trunks, discovered the truly valuable treasure lay in the connections forged through adversity and the strength revealed when tested by circumstance. The gold would build their future homestead, but the foundation had already been established through shared courage and mutual respect. The mail-order bride had indeed found her intended husband, not through conventional means, but through a crucible that revealed the true character of both. And in that revelation lay promise far greater than either could have anticipated when their correspondence began. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.